presentation of independent political and economic news analysis by the economist Jargal. Our gazette is published in Mongolian, English, Japanese, and Russian. Please order your subscription online at www.jargaldefacto.com or from the post office called Mongol Shudan near you. Also, you can order by phone at 7007 8916.
Good evening. Welcome to Defacto Review, our weekly in-depth analysis on the current news and affairs with Mr. Bae Dulgon, who is our economist and commentator for today. So to join in on our conversation, you can go to MNB World Facebook page and on hashtag Jargal_Defacto. Now let's take a look at the stories for today. Impact of coronavirus on the Mongolian economy. Is budget amendment really necessary? Business owners and threat of coronavirus. Now let's get into our first topic. The COVID-19 outbreak is causing massive strain on the world economy, not to mention the domestic economy of Mongolia. The government of Mongolia took various kinds of actions and measures to prevent possible outbreak of the virus in the country. However, as a result, lots of complications arose for the economy. Despite these setbacks, the coal export will begin this month with all the necessary disinfection procedures required from the Chinese side. Additionally, a draft bill to exempt import tax and tariffs on certain food products has been submitted to the parliament. So let's get into our questions. Our first question for today is that economic statistics of Mongolia has increased steadily for the last 2 years. However, because of the worldwide health emergency, and the fact that this year is election year, will economic growth fall back?
We shouldn't focus on only Mongolian economy. Let's look at the world economy first. The world economy is expected to grow about 3.3% in 2020, according to IMF. However, due to coronavirus activities and the impact from this disease, the IMF reduced its forecast by about 0.6 percentage points. That means in 2020, the world economy is expected to grow about 2.7%. That means it's quite big fall in terms of growth.
Right.
And if you look at what's happening in a commodity market in the last month or month and a half, then all commodity prices fell more than 10%, which means the impact in Mongolian economy will be greater. And the biggest trade partner and partner in terms of economic activity is China. So Chinese economy is very important to Mongolia. So look, how is the Chinese economy is doing? Originally, the Chinese government expected or planned the Chinese economy to grow about 6.0%. However, due to a coronavirus, they are reducing this forecast. According to Economic Intelligence Unit, the optimistic scenario produces about 5.7%, and baseline scenario is 5.4%. And pessimistic is about 4.5%. If in the pessimistic scenario, the economic growth, the Chinese economic growth is going to fall about 1.5 percentage points. That's a percentage point, right? So it's a huge impact on the economy. So that will also, the world economy is, the forecast is falling, the Chinese economic forecast is falling, and I expect the Mongolian economic growth will fall as well. If you look at the export statistics, the foreign trade fell about $410 million.
Right.
That including import and export in the first 2 months of the year compared to last year. So what I see is that if this export ban is border closure is going to continue, our export as well as import is going to fall. If it continues to fall for another month or so, then our budget will not going to meet with its forecasted revenue.
Right, so import was reduced due to Tsagasar was banned and borders were because of the borders were closed.
Yep.
So, but the foreign exchange reserve didn't decline. And however, did this increase the inflation in Mongolia?
The increase in, we all know that inflation increased. The inflation increase is due mainly to some meat products, or meat basically, because it weights about 10% or a little more than 10 percentage points in weights in calculating inflation. So if you look at the meat prices is highest when it's in January or February. It has been repeated over the last 4 years. So mainly increase in inflation is due to meat prices. So did the other products increase? Yes, but it's not as big as meat price increase. If you look at the foreign exchange reserve, the impact is not known yet, because we have been border closure only less than a month now, right? So if it continues, it's going to impact for sure. Why? Because first of all, we haven't done anything to curb the import values in terms of having a policy on a tariff increase, right? Rather, we have even reduced the import tax, which means the government, in order to support its businesses, the policy is to have import tariff exemption, right?
Okay, so what should the government do in this situation right now?
There are a number of things the government can do. First of all, because we are not exporting, the government should aim to reduce imports. How to do that? The government can increase the tariffs on non-necessary products or widely used products. For example, the government should not increase any tariff on the food or any industrial inputs, but they should increase the tariff on items like cars, because in 2018, Mongolians imported about 64,000 cars with a value of $500 million. It's a big chunk of the import. In 2019, Mongolians imported about 69,700 cars with a value of $420 million US dollars. So if we have such huge part of the import not reduced, then we will have foreign trade deficits. The foreign trade deficit will further impact the balance of payments. And now, with the balance of payments, deficit in the balance of payment, as well as a budget deficit, the economists call this twin deficits.
Right.
With those twin deficits, the economy will deteriorate in relatively short time. So what economists in general suggest is that any country should not have twin deficits. The first, focus either on budget, or second, on the balance of payments. And the second suggestion is on the budget. As an economist, I recommend that budget should be amended, most preferably in March.
Right.
Yeah.
So the government is already taking actions about exemption of tariffs. But what about, as you said, the increasing the tax and tariffs on the non-necessary? Are they doing any work about that?
Mm-hmm. What the government is doing by having import tax exemption is to support the businesses,
right?
Especially businesses that produce some parts imported from foreign countries, right? So if in generally on most of the products we have about 5% tariff and 10% VAT, and that in all totals about 15%.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's get into our next topic.
Yeah.
So let's get into our next topic about the budget amendment. So the government of Mongolia made several decisions about import tariff exemption on certain products as well as rent of the trade centers. Some economists consider these decisions are not enough and says that the budget must be amended. However, Mongolian Ministry of Finance stressed that there is no need for any amendment and that the country's economy is fully capable to overcome 1 year of complications and hardship. So our first question about this one is that what kind of expenses can be trimmed, in the budget? If there is a budget amendment, what kind of budgets can be trimmed from this?
Mm-hmm. First of all, if I understand that Ministry of Finance is insisting that there is no need for budget amendment. However, I disagree with that conclusion. Why? First of all, the commodity prices fell across the board. The second, if we do not export for 1.5 months, that's 1 full month and 1/2 month, there is an economic study that our economic growth will fall by 2.5 percentage points. 2.5 percentage points out of 6.0% growth, that puts us back in about range of 3.5% economic growth. If we look at our forecast made in October last year and use it for the budget law, then such fall in economic growth will put really low income for the budget revenues. If that's the case, then our budget deficit will increase further, well north of 2 trillion tugrux. So I really stress that the Ministry of Finance should look back on their recommendations or their conclusions on whether it's necessary.
So if they look back on this, what kind of expenses can be trimmed from that with the amendment?
With the amendment, the first expenses should be trimmed is the investment on buildings like monuments and buildings of museums that they intend to take down. For example, the Museum of Natural History, they took it down and now it's going to spend over 30 billion tugrux just on building a new museum. I think that's unnecessary in my point.
So these can be maybe set back for 3 to 2 years? There are lots of buildings with the historical significance and cultural significance that needs to be built. They're going to demolish some of the cultural buildings even.
If you look at the budget law, there is all the items that's going to have a certain budget for this year. So I can't say for all those buildings, because some of them are already started in 2018 right. and 2019, and which need to be finished. Some, for example, school buildings. I don't think those budgets for school buildings should be trimmed at all. What I think is that those doesn't pay back. Maybe monuments, right? Maybe some museum, maybe some cultural centers in SOMs or in AMEC centers, they can be postponed, or the old building can still be used rather than take down and start a new building on the same site.
So what kind of measures can the government take other than making budget amendments? What can they do? What kind of options are there to compensate for the budget deficit?
Mm-hmm. It's really hard. If our budget has already 2 trillion tugruk gap, basically deficit, which means the revenue is about 2 trillion turuks smaller than the expense. That makes about 5.1% of the GDP. If the revenue falls, the deficit will increase, maybe increase up to 8 or 9% of the GDP. That's a huge gap. And if such a gap exists, then where will the money come from? The money will come from either through international assistance, or it will be additional debt on the government, which means the government debt will further increase. And if government debt further increases, then it reduces our prospect for growth in the short and medium term. So I truly think that only way to have reasonable debt level at the same time with a reasonable growth is that make a budget amendment so that the government debt doesn't increase so much. At the same time, the economic growth will be within the ranges of what we forecast in the last October when we're making budget calculations.
So why did the Minister of Finance said that Mongolian economy is fully capable of taking damage for 1 year? Where did he make this conclusion? As you said, it is almost impossible to do without a budget amendment, but he says that we can.
Mm-hmm. There might be 2 reasons for that. The first is more likely that the budget amendment is going to happen. However, it's only going to happen after the election. When is the election? It's in June 24th this year. So in order to not to further reduce the economy in first half of the year, the Ministry of Finance is going to spend as planned, which means they want to have a good economic growth when the election happens. So that's the main idea. And maybe after the election, if the budget amendment is necessary, he's kind of postponing the budget amendment rather than in March. He's going to make it in maybe July after the election. So that's most likely scenario in my mind.
But what if the global health emergency is solved by that time? Do we really need a budget amendment if that happens? Maybe in 1 month this will be solved.
No. What I think is that it doesn't matter which way the optimistic scenario or in pessimistic scenario the future events going to happen. I believe that in any event, a budget amendment is necessary. So it's not just the country, it's the businesses, it's the households. Everybody should have their own plans necessary for preparing whatever comes as a result of this disease or spread of disease. And if the government decides to postpone the required amendment by saying that they can overcome in a year time and make the amendment in July, maybe there will be many businesses and many households could have prepared over 4 months earlier, but now they are going to change their plan in July. So that will have a completely different consequences for those businesses as well as those households who are impacted by this disease.
So what can business owners do to influence this decision to make it maybe in March?
I have some statistics from Chamber of Commerce. They have conducted a survey among 1,100 member companies and asked whether the coronavirus impacted their business. About 57% said it impacted a lot. About 32% said the impact was quite average or below the average. So if it's just the members of Chamber of Commerce, even then a lot of businesses are impacted, whether they are in mining services or mining or generally services or retail business. Those are the sectors that has the greatest impact so far.
Okay, so let's get into our third topic about the business owners and the threat of coronavirus. The Speaker of Parliament, Untitled Chapter, met with the ministers, chairpersons of the standing committees, and heads of the Bank of Mongolia and Mongolian National Chamber of Commerce and Industry to discuss ways to overcome economic difficulties. As a result, a decision was made to decrease the loan interest of business owners and to reduce the policy rate. Private sector representatives noted that due to the current economic situation, some small and medium enterprises are going bankrupt. So our first question about this one is, what can business owners do in this situation?
Let me look at the survey.
Right.
Because there are some interesting statistics for our audience here. They asked what are the challenges at this moment in this same survey conducted by Chamber of Commerce. About 66% said they have the greatest challenge is the loan and the loan interest, time, and interest rate level. The 22 points said it's the rent. About 9% said some government services and red tape. About 3% said the source of finance. And if you look at those numbers, then it's easily certain that those loan rate and the interest rate is the greatest challenge among the businesses, because they all whenever people take loan from financial institutions, they put something as a collateral.
Right.
So whenever they cannot pay and the loan becomes bad loan, then their chances of losing those collateral increases. However, no bank takes collateral at 100%. They always value at the 70% or lower. The non-banking institutions value it even lower than the commercial banks. So it's quite hard for the businesses to make profit at this period of the year whenever this economic activity is slowing down, right? And the government policy in order to keep the coronavirus out of the country is affecting those businesses as well. For example, we already know all the gyms, all the cinemas, right? All the bars close at 10, etc. All those kind of reduces the revenue significantly. Some of the places like cinemas, they don't have any revenue at this moment.
Right.
So in order to help with those businesses, government should have specific policies that's greatly affected by the government policies at the same time. One. Second is the government can have tariffs increased, I said earlier, on the non-necessary products which has high value, like cars, so that we not gonna make this health issue into economic issue by having a foreign trade deficit, and that further impacts and might even result in foreign exchange issues in the medium term.
So will reducing policy rate and bank interest loans give tangible results for business owners?
in my perspective, interest rate should be set by commercial banks themselves. And any government policy should not touch this interest rate because it's set by market and it's followed up by the market. And if ever government is trying to make any policy, then it should be best helped if it's through some tax rate or tax returns. You understand what I mean?
Right.
The financial market is very sensitive, and if things are working smoothly, then government should not touch it. That's my perspective. So even though businesses says reduce the interest rate, it's not a decision of the government. The government cannot reduce the interest rate of the commercial banks by just having some policy. Even if they can, they shouldn't, because they're going to break up some market mechanism that's working well in the country. So rather than doing that, they can help the businesses with their tax policies. Let's say maybe returns of certain tax percentage back to the businesses in some sectors that's specifically affected by the government policy itself.
So, but the government itself made a different decision. So what should they do about it? Should they change it?
No, it's the policy rate. Policy rate is set by the central bank, and they're going to reduce the policy rate by 0.5 percentage points. And it can help businesses because by reducing the policy rate, it will free up some capital. And that capital, we hope that it will go to the businesses which need a capital source, right? Some financing. Businesses need financing. If that's the case, then reducing policy rate can help those businesses. But at the same time, I'm not certain of it because freeing up some capital by reducing policy rate might increase consumption rather than increase in investment.
So what are other nations are taking? What kind of measures are they taking to reduce this impact on their economy? Mm-hmm. So could you tell us maybe some examples of other nations?
Mm-hmm. There are the China, Hong Kong, and Singapore are a few cases that I know. What I read is that Hong Kong government is providing some tax returns. I forgot the amount.
Right.
But China, if you look at China and the coronavirus impact, some provinces are impacted greatly and some others not impacted at all. So it really depends on the investment of the federal government. China has many provinces, and the government has more money kept in their safe, so they are prepared for rainy day, and they are increasing investment in certain provinces than planned before in 2019.
Right. Okay, so thank you for that. Unfortunately, that is all the time we had for today. We will see you next week with more topics. Have a nice evening. Goodbye.